The acrid scent of burnt coffee usually signaled a bad day for Maya. But today something far more bitter was brewing in the worn-down booths of the Daily Grind Cafe. It wasn't the faulty espresso machine, nor the growing pile of bills tucked in her apron. It was the man in the bespoke suit whose dismissive flick of the wrist sent a piece of trash fluttering to the floor. A small act of arrogance that would ignite a confrontation Maya never anticipated. Little did she know that defiant moment would lead to the purr of a Bentley engine outside her humble apartment that very night, carrying an envelope that could unravel her entire world. The morning sun, already surprisingly fierce for early May, did little to warm the perpetually shadowed corners of the Daily Grind Cafe. Maya Vance squinted as she wiped down a sticky formica tabletop, the rag tracing familiar circular patterns that had become a meditative ritual in her 3 years of waitressing here. The cafe, with its chipped linoleum floor, mismatched mugs, and the ever-present aroma of stale grease battling fresh coffee, was both her sanctuary and her cage. It paid the bills, barely, for the tiny apartment she shared with her ailing grandmother, and covered the tuition for her online night classes in social work. Dreams of a different life, one where she helped people in more profound ways than refilling a bottomless cup, were what fueled her through the long shifts. Maya wasn't a natural optimist, but she was resilient. Life had taught her that early. Her dark, observant eyes often caught details others missed. The tremor in an elderly customer's hand as he reached for his wallet, the nervous energy of a young couple on a first date, the subtle weariness behind a forced smile. It was this empathy, this quiet understanding of human nature, that made her good at her job, even if the job itself was slowly grinding her down. The morning rush had ebbed, leaving behind a scattering of regulars. Mr. Henderson, nursing his black coffee and the city newspaper. 2 giggling students sharing a muffin they couldn't quite afford individually, and Mrs. Peterson, who always ordered a decaf latte with an extra shot of vanilla and a side of gossip. Maya moved between them with an efficiency born of practice, her smile genuine, her voice soft. It was just past 11 a.m. when the bell above the door chimed with a discordant clang, announcing an arrival that felt distinctly out of place. The man who entered was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Maya earned in 6 months. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His shoes gleamed with an almost offensive polish, and an air of unshakable, almost predatory confidence preceded him. He looked around the humble cafe with an expression that hovered somewhere between disdain and mild amusement, as if he'd stumbled into a quaint exhibit of how the other half lived. He chose a booth by the window, the one with the torn vinyl seat that Maya always tried to steer people away from. She picked up a menu, its edges softened and stained with countless fingerprints, and approached him. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Daily Grind. Coffee." Maya offered, her voice professionally pleasant. The man didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed outside on the bustling street, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the tabletop. "Espresso, double. And make sure it's actual espresso, not that brown water you probably serve here." His voice was a low baritone, clipped and accustomed to instant obedience. Maya felt a familiar prickle of annoyance, the kind she usually swallowed down with a practiced gulp. "Right away, sir." She relayed the order to Marco, the cafe's owner, and cook, a perpetually flustered man, with a heart of gold and a temper that flared as quickly as the gas burners on his stove. "Got a live one in booth 4, she muttered. Marco grunted, already wrestling with the ancient espresso machine. "Just smile and nod, Maya. The customer is always right, even when they're a colossal—" He trailed off, wiping sweat from his brow. The espresso, when it was finally coaxed from the wheezing machine, was surprisingly decent. Maya delivered it, placing it carefully on a clean paper napkin beside the man. He picked it up without a word, took a short, critical sip, and then set it down. His attention had shifted to a sleek, impossibly thin tablet he'd produced from a leather briefcase. Maya continued with her duties, clearing tables, refilling water glasses, trying to ignore the man's imposing presence. He ordered nothing else. For nearly an hour, he sat there tapping and scrolling occasionally, taking a curt phone call where he spoke in clipped sentences about acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and shareholder dissatisfaction. He radiated an aura of immense wealth and ruthless power, a stark contrast to the cafe's worn-out charm. Finally, he closed his tablet, drained the last of his espresso, and stood up. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from a slim platinum money clip and dropped it onto the table. The espresso was $3. Maya watched, expecting him to at least glance her way, perhaps even utter a perfunctory, "Thank you." He did not. Instead, as he turned to leave, he casually took the paper napkin he'd barely used, crumpled it in his hand, and then with a flick of his wrist, let it fall to the floor beside the booth. It landed there, a small white blemish on the already imperfect linoleum. Maya froze. It wasn't a large piece of trash. It was insignificant, really, a crumpled napkin. But it was the casualness of the act, the utter lack of regard, the unspoken assertion that someone else, someone like her, would naturally clean up his mess. It was the dismissal in that flick of the wrist that resonated with every slight, every moment of being overlooked, every instance of feeling invisible that she had ever endured. Mr. Henderson was looking pointedly at the napkin and then at Maya. His eyebrows raised. The two students had fallen silent, their eyes wide. Even Mrs. Peterson paused mid-sentence, her cup halfway to her lips. The cafe for a beat seemed to hold its breath. Maya felt a flush creep up her neck. Her heart began to thump, a heavy rhythm against her ribs. Her training, her need for this job, the fear of Marco's potential anger, all screamed at her to ignore it. Pick it up later. Say nothing. He was already halfway to the door. He was a man who could probably buy this entire block and not even notice the expenditure. But then a different voice, one she hadn't realized was so strong, rose within her. It was the voice of her grandmother, who had always taught her the importance of dignity, no matter how humble one's circumstances. It was the voice of her own burgeoning sense of justice, the very reason she was studying social work. To stand up for those who couldn't, to challenge small injustices before they grew into larger ones. He was almost at the door. It was now or never. Her voice, when it came out, was clearer and firmer than she expected. "Excuse me, sir." The man paused, his hand on the door handle, and turned slowly, his expression one of mild surprise, as if a piece of furniture had spoken. "Yes?" His tone wasn't questioning. It was impatient, bordering on irritation. Maya's gaze flickered to the crumpled napkin on the floor, then back to his expensive, impassive face. "You dropped something." Alistair Cromwell's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of a millimeter. "I did." He glanced around vaguely, as if expecting to see a misplaced diamond tiara or a stray stock certificate. Maya maintained eye contact, her heart now a frantic drummer in her chest. "Yes, sir. Your napkin. It's on the floor by your booth." She pointed, her hand steady, despite the tremor that was beginning to work its way through her limbs. The air in the daily grind grew thick, charged with an unspoken tension. Mr. Henderson had stopped pretending to read his paper. his gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. The students were leaning forward, captivated. Marco had emerged from the kitchen, a greasy spatula in hand. His brow furrowed with concern as he sensed the shift in atmosphere. Cromwell followed her pointed finger, his eyes landing on the crumpled white paper. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Annoyance? Disbelief? Or was it a sliver of amusement? He then looked back at Maya, his gaze now sharp, analytical. "So it is?" he said, his voice cool and dismissive. He made no move. The implication was clear. And what of it? This was the critical point. Maya could back down, mutter an apology, and let it go. Marco was already starting to make anxious cut-it-out gestures from behind the counter. The $100 bill on the table felt like a weight, a silent bribe for her silence, for her complicity in being treated as invisible. But the fire lit within her was now burning too brightly to be easily extinguished. It wasn't just about a napkin anymore. It was about respect. For herself, for the space she worked in, for the simple decency that wealth should not exempt anyone from. "Would you mind picking it up, please?" Maya asked, her voice still polite, but with an undercurrent of steel that surprised even herself. A low chuckle rumbled in Cromwell's chest. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was condescending, a verbal pat on the head to a naive child. "You want me to pick that up?" He gestured vaguely towards the napkin, with a hand that probably signed multi-million-dollar deals without a second thought. "Don't you have staff for that sort of thing? Isn't that what you're paid for, dear?" The dear was an extra twist of the knife designed to demean, to put her in her place. Maya felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "I'm paid to serve customers, sir, and to keep the cafe clean. But making a mess and expecting someone else to clean it up when you're perfectly capable isn't about service. It's about consideration. We try to maintain a pleasant environment for everyone." "A pleasant environment?" Cromwell scoffed, his eyes sweeping around the worn cafe again, this time with open derision. "My dear girl, this place is one step above a soup kitchen. Let's not get ahead of ourselves with delusions of grandeur." "It's where I work, sir," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. "And it deserves respect, just like any other place. Just like anyone else." Marco was now frantically trying to catch her eye, mouthing, "Maya, please." His livelihood depended on not angering customers, especially ones who looked like they could shut him down with a phone call. Cromwell stared at her for a long, unnerving moment. His eyes, the color of icy seawater, seemed to pierce right through her, assessing, calculating. Maya could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. He was a man accustomed to people cowering to instant compliance. This small act of defiance from a waitress in a rundown cafe was clearly an anomaly, an unwelcome disruption to his ordered world. "You have a rather inflated sense of your position, young woman," he said, finally, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft level. "And a misplaced sense of principle. It won't get you far in life." "Perhaps," Maya conceded, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "But I'll be able to sleep at night. Sir, please. The napkin." She could see the battle in his eyes. On one hand, the sheer audacity of her request. On the other, the public nature of the confrontation. He was a man of image, of control. Making a scene over a piece of paper was likely beneath him, yet being dictated to by a waitress was equally unpalatable. Other patrons were now openly staring their meals forgotten. He let out a slow, deliberate breath. Then, with a look of utter contempt, he took a step towards the booth. Maya thought for a moment he might actually bend down. Instead, He reached into his pocket, pulled out his platinum money clip again, peeled off another $100 bill, and let it flutter to the floor beside the napkin. "Perhaps that will provide adequate compensation for the extraordinary effort required," he sneered. He then turned on his heel and strode out of the cafe, the door chiming mockingly behind him. Silence descended thick and heavy. Maya stood rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the $200 bills and the crumpled napkin lying on the floor. She felt a strange mixture of triumph and nausea. She had stood her ground, but at what cost? Marco rushed over his face, pale. "Maya, are you crazy? What were you thinking? That man, do you know who that could be? He could ruin us." "He was rude, Marco, and disrespectful." Maya said, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to ebb. "He threw his trash on the floor. It's not right." "Right. Wrong. What pays the bills? Maya right doesn't keep the lights on." Marco gestured wildly. "That's $200 on the floor. Just pick it up. Pick up the napkin. And let's forget this ever happened." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Young lady," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "I, for one, think you did the right thing. It takes courage to stand up to bullies, no matter how well dressed they are." He gave her a respectful nod. The students murmured their agreement. Maya looked at the money, then at the napkin. She bent down slowly, her body aching with a tension she hadn't realized she was holding. She picked up the crumpled napkin first, its texture flimsy and insignificant in her hand. Then she picked up the $200 bills. She walked over to the till, Marco watching her with wary eyes. She rang in the $3 espresso. She took $3 from one of the bills, placed it in the register, and then slid the remaining $197 into the tip jar, which was usually sparsely populated with loose change and the occasional dollar bill. "That," she said, looking at Marco, then at the other customers, who were still watching, "is for the cafe, for the extraordinary effort." Marco stared at the tip jar, then back at Maya, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning respect. "Maya, I might lose my job over this, Marco, I know," she said quietly. "But I couldn't just let him do that." She felt a profound weariness settle over her. The defiance had been exhilarating, but the potential consequences were terrifying. She spent the rest of her shift in a daze, replaying the scene in her mind. Every time the cafe door opened, her stomach lurched, expecting repercussions. Would he send someone? Would he call and complain? Would Marco, after the initial shock wore off, decide she was too much of a liability? When her shift finally ended, the weight of the day pressed down on her. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows as she walked home. The usual city sounds fading into a dull hum in her ears. The image of Mr. Cromwell's icy eyes and condescending sneer was seared into her memory. She had won a small victory for dignity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. She clutched her worn bag a little tighter, the small amount of her actual tips for the day, feeling insignificant against the turmoil in her heart. She was proud of what she did, but also deeply, deeply afraid. The walk to her small third-floor apartment in a pre-war building on the city's less glamorous side was usually a time for Maya to decompress. She'd observe the neighborhood's rhythm children playing hopscotch on the cracked sidewalks, the smell of diverse dinners wafting from open windows, the distant wail of a siren that was an almost constant urban lullaby. Tonight, however, the familiar scenes blurred into an anxious haze. Every shadow seemed to lengthen ominously. Every passing car sounded like it was slowing down specifically for her. Mr. Cromwell's face, with its aura of untouchable power and cold disdain, kept replaying in her mind. His parting words, "It won't get you far in life," echoed with a chilling certainty. Had she been foolish, reckless? Her grandmother, Nana Rose, always said, "Courage, child, isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it." Maya had acted, but now the fear was threatening to consume her. She let herself into the apartment, the scent of lavender and old books, Nana Rose's signature aroma, offering a small measure of comfort. Her grandmother was in her usual armchair by the window, a thick novel resting in her lap, her silver-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. Nana Rose had a quiet strength that had been Maya's anchor through countless storms. Her eyes, though clouded with age, were still sharp and perceptive. "Long day, sweet pea," Nana Rose asked, her voice a gentle rasp. Maya managed a weak smile. "You could say that, Nana." She hesitated, unsure if she should burden her grandmother with the day's drama. Nana Rose's heart wasn't what it used to be, but her grandmother had always been able to read her like an open book. Trouble at the daily grind. Maya sighed, sinking onto the worn ottoman at her grandmother's feet. The worst, or maybe the best, I can't decide. And so the story tumbled out. The impeccable suit, the dismissive littering her own audacious demand, the $100 bills contemptuously thrown on the floor. Nana Rose listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When Maya finished detailing her fear of losing her job, Nana Rose reached out a frail, veined hand and cupped Maya's cheek. "Maya Vance," she said, her voice firm despite its softness. "Your grandfather, bless his soul, always said, a person's true worth is measured by how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. That man, for all his money, showed his poverty of character today. You, my dear, showed your wealth." "But Nana," Maya whispered, "wealth of character doesn't pay the rent. It doesn't cover your medication or my tuition." The anxiety gnawed at her. Marco had been understanding, even impressed in the immediate aftermath. But what about tomorrow, when the reality of business, of potential repercussions set in? "We'll manage, Maya. We always have," Nana Rose said with unwavering conviction. "You stood up for yourself for decency. There's no shame in that, only pride. Don't let that man's arrogance steal your peace." Her grandmother's words were a balm, but the knot of anxiety in Maya's stomach remained. She prepared their simple dinner of soup and toast, her mind still racing. She tried to focus on her online coursework later that evening, delving into theories of social justice and community advocacy. But the irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, studying how to fight systemic unfairness while potentially becoming a victim of a petty personal one. She replayed Marco's face. He was a good man, but he was also a small business owner, vulnerable to the whims of powerful people. The daily grind wasn't just a job to Maya. It was a lifeline. Losing it would mean upending her fragile stability, delaying her studies, and adding more worry to Nana Rose's already burdened shoulders. What if Mr. Cromwell owned the building the cafe was in? What if he had connections that could make Marco's life difficult? Health inspections, supplier issues, sudden rent hikes. The rich and powerful had ways, subtle and overt, of exerting their influence. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through her. She remembered the name on a discreet gold-embossed logo on his impossibly thin tablet, Cromwell Holdings. A quick, trembling search on her old laptop confirmed her fears. Alistair Cromwell wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan of industry, a renowned and often feared corporate raider. His picture was everywhere, shaking hands with politicians, launching massive skyscrapers, his steely gaze a constant. Articles detailed his ruthless business tactics, his philanthropic endeavors, which seemed more like PR exercises, and his notorious impatience with incompetence or opposition. Reading about him only amplified her terror. Maya Vance, a waitress, had told Alistair Cromwell, a man who moved markets and toppled CEOs, to pick up his trash. It felt simultaneously ludicrous and terrifying. Sleep offered little respite. She tossed and turned, haunted by visions of Cromwell's icy glare and the contemptuous flick of his wrist. She dreamt of being fired, of Nana Rose, falling ill of her dreams, crumbling into dust, all because of a crumpled napkin. The next morning she woke with a sense of foreboding. Her shift at the daily grind didn't start until the afternoon, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She called Marco, her voice betraying her nervousness. "Marco, it's Maya. Is everything okay?" Marco's voice on the other end was subdued. "Morning, Maya. Look about yesterday." Maya's heart sank. This was it. "I understand if you have to let me go, Marco. I really am sorry if I caused any trouble for the cafe." There was a pause. "Let you go, Maya? What are you talking about?" Marco sounded genuinely surprised. "If anything, I should be giving you a raise. You know, after you left, Mr. Henderson came up to me, said he was a retired lawyer. He said that Cromwell's character is a notorious bully, and he was impressed by you. He even left an extra 50 in the tip jar, saying it was for combat pay." Maya was stunned. "He did, yeah. And those students, they posted something on their campus social media page about a badass waitress standing up to a corporate jerk at the daily grind. We've had a few more young people in this morning than usual, curious, I guess." Marco chuckled, a sound of relief and surprise. "You're a local hero, kid." A small measure of warmth spread through Maya, easing the icy grip of fear. "So, I'm not fired. Fired, are you kidding? You're the best waitress I've got, Maya. A bit too fiery sometimes, maybe," he added with a laugh. "But your heart's in the right place. Just maybe try not to take on any more billionaires before lunchtime." "Okay." "My nerves can't take it." Maya laughed, a genuine laugh this time, light and relieved. "Deal, Marco. Thanks." She hung up, a wide smile on her face. Maybe Nana Rose was right. Maybe standing up for herself wouldn't lead to ruin. Maybe things would be okay. The rest of the day passed with a newfound lightness. Her online classes seemed more engaging, Nana Rose's stories more vibrant. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it had receded, replaced by a quiet sense of pride and the surprising warmth of community support. Mr. Henderson, the students, their small gestures meant the world. As evening descended, Maya found herself looking out her apartment window, not with dread, but with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in over 24 hours. The city lights twinkled, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that her small act of defiance wouldn't bring her world crashing down. It was then, as she was about to draw the curtains, that she saw it. A long, impossibly sleek black car, polished to a mirror shine, was gliding to a halt directly in front of her building. It was out of place in their modest neighborhood, as conspicuous as a panther in a pigeon coop. It was a Bentley. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no mistaking the distinctive winged insignia, even from 3 floors up. Her blood ran cold. This couldn't be a coincidence. The Bentley idled silently, a creature of profound darkness and impossible polish that seemed to absorb the weak glow of the streetlights. It didn't just park, It held court, its very presence on their worn, cracked street, a violation of the natural order. It was a vessel of unimaginable luxury, and in this context, a harbinger of pure dread. Maya's brief reprieve from anxiety earned through Marco's reassurances and the surprising support of her customers, shattered like fine crystal dropped on concrete. It was replaced by a far more potent, chilling fear that coiled in the pit of her stomach. Marco might have found the incident amusing in hindsight, and Mr. Henderson might have approved, but this silent, gleaming machine was proof that Alistair Cromwell was not amused. He was not a man to be trifled with or publicly bested, however minor the stage. This was not a forgotten incident. It was an unfinished one. Nana Rose, whose sensitivity to Maya's moods was as finely tuned as a seismograph, looked up from her knitting her needles, ceasing their rhythmic clicking. "What is it, child? You've gone as white as a sheet." Maya's voice was a strangled whisper, her finger pointing with a trembling hand. "A car. Downstairs. It's a Bentley." Nana Rose's needles stilled completely. She didn't need to ask for clarification. She knew, with the quiet certainty of age and wisdom, whose presence that car likely signified. A shadow of deep concern crossed her usually serene face, etching new lines around her soft eyes. "Step away from the window, Maya. Right now. There's no need to give them a target." But Maya was mesmerized, rooted to the spot by a morbid cocktail of terror and disbelief. This wasn't a summons to a sterile downtown office, nor was it a curt letter from a lawyer that would arrive in the mail. This was a direct, personal intrusion into her life, a silent, gleaming threat parked right outside the sanctuary of her home. It felt like a predator stalking its prey, patiently waiting for the most opportune moment to strike, demonstrating its power simply by being where it did not belong. She remembered the cold, analytical glint in Cromwell's eyes, and knew this was a calculated move. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The car remained its engine, a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate up through the floorboards. No one got out. Were they watching her apartment? Did they know which window was hers? The sheer anonymity of it was a form of psychological warfare. In the apartment across the street, Maya could see Mrs. Rodriguez's curtains twitch, a brief parting, and then a quick closing. Down on the sidewalk, a group of teenagers who had been laughing loudly fell silent, their bravado evaporating as they gave the car a wide berth. The Bentley wasn't just a threat to her. It was an alien presence that disrupted the entire block's fragile ecosystem. "It might not be for us," Nana Rose said, her voice a bastion of calm in Maya's swirling panic. "A car like that could have business anywhere, I suppose. A lost driver." Maya wanted desperately to believe that, but the timing, the sheer glaring improbability of it, was too stark to ignore. "No, Nana. It's for me. He's making a point." Just as the words left her lips, the passenger side door opened, not with the brisk efficiency she might have expected, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was somehow more menacing. A man emerged. It wasn't Alistair Cromwell himself, but someone who bore the same stamp of quiet authority and expensive tailoring. He was younger than Cromwell, perhaps in his late 40s, with a severe side-parted haircut and an impassive, almost funereal expression. He wore a dark suit of a material that seemed to drink the light, a crisp white shirt, and a tie so conservatively knotted it seemed to choke any hint of personality. He was the kind of man who handled delicate matters with discretion and ruthless efficiency, the velvet glove on an iron fist. He didn't look up at the building. His gaze was fixed forward, as he walked around to the boot of the Bentley. He opened it and retrieved a single, slender briefcase, closing the boot with a soft, expensive thud that echoed in the sudden quiet of the street. Then he turned and began to walk towards the entrance of Maya's building, his polished shoes clicking softly on the pavement. "He's coming in." Maya breathed, her hand flying to her chest as her heart hammered against her ribs so violently she thought it might break free. "Nana, he's coming in. What should I do? Should I call the police and say what?" Nana Rose countered, her voice sharp but steady. "That a man in a suit is walking into our building. Calm yourself, Maya. We don't know what he wants. Let him knock. Be polite, but be firm. Don't let him intimidate you. You have done nothing wrong." Easy for her to say, Maya thought her mind a frantic slideshow of worst-case scenarios. She backed away from the window, her legs feeling like lead. The small apartment, usually her refuge, suddenly felt claustrophobic, a trap. The seconds ticked by, each one louder than the last in the suffocating silence. Then it came a firm, decisive knock on their apartment door. Knock, knock, knock. Not aggressive, but not tentative either. It was the knock of someone who had never been kept waiting in his life. Maya looked at Nana Rose, her eyes wide with a silent plea. Nana Rose gave a small, encouraging nod. "Go on, child. Courage. Face it." Taking a deep, shaky breath, Maya walked to the door. She could feel the man's presence on the other side, a palpable wave of cold formality. She fumbled with the deadbolt and the chain lock, her fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. She pulled the door open a few inches, the brass chain holding it fast. The man stood there, perfectly framed in the narrow opening. His expression was utterly neutral, his eyes giving nothing away. He held the slim briefcase in one hand, perfectly parallel to the floor. "Miss Maya Vance?" he asked. His voice was as devoid of inflection as his face, cultured, precise, and cold as marble. "Yes." Maya managed her voice, a thin, reedy thing she barely recognized. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he stated. "I am an executive associate of Mr. Alistair Cromwell." So it was confirmed. The dread solidified into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "What does he want?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Mr. Pendleton did not answer immediately. His gaze flickered briefly past her, taking in the dimly lit, modest apartment, before returning to her face. "Mr. Cromwell asked me to deliver this to you personally." He held up the briefcase slightly. "It is a private communication." A private communication, not a lawsuit, not a verbal tirade delivered by proxy. The anticlimax was almost as unsettling as her worst fears. "What is it?" Maya asked, her suspicion overriding her fear for a moment. "My instructions were merely to ensure its safe and direct delivery." "Miss Vance," Mr. Pendleton said smoothly, "I am not privy to the contents." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "May I come in? Or would you prefer to conduct this transaction in the hallway?" There was no judgment in his tone, just a clinical statement of options. Maya hesitated. Letting this man, this emissary of Alistair Cromwell, into her home felt like a surrender, a violation of her last safe space. But leaving him standing in the hallway, prolonging this encounter under the unseen eyes of her neighbors, felt equally unbearable. She glanced back at Nana Rose, who gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't let him in." "I'll take it here," Maya said, her voice a little stronger. Mr. Pendleton nodded once, a curt, economical movement. He placed the briefcase on his knee, opening it, with two quiet, satisfying clicks of its clasps. The interior was lined with dark grey silk, and nestled within it was a single crisp cream-coloured envelope. It was thick, made of expensive-feeling paper, and bore no markings on the outside, no name, no address, just its own silent, weighty presence. He withdrew the envelope and held it out to her through the narrow opening of the door. Maya stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Her hand, when she finally reached for it, was visibly trembling. Her fingers brushed against his, and his skin felt cool and dry like old paper. The envelope felt heavy in her hand, far heavier than mere paper and ink should. "Mr. Cromwell asked that you review its contents at your earliest convenience," Mr. Pendleton stated. "He also asked me to convey that he awaits your response." "My response?" Maya echoed, her mind reeling in confusion. "A response to what? The contents of the envelope will make that clear. Miss Vance?" Pendleton replied, his expression unchanging. He closed his briefcase with the same quiet precision. "I will see myself out. Good evening." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned and walked back towards the stairs. His footsteps were nearly silent, receding down the hallway, as if he were a ghost. Maya watched until he was gone, then quickly closed and locked the door, leaning against it for a moment, the heavy envelope clutched in her hand, trying to will her heart back into a normal rhythm. "Maya, what on earth is it?" Nana Rose called out, her voice laced with concern. Maya walked back into the living room, holding the envelope out as if it might spontaneously combust. He gave me this," she said, bewildered. "From Cromwell. He said the man is waiting for my response." Nana Rose looked from the envelope to Maya's pale face, her brow furrowed. "Well," she said, a flicker of her old fire returning to her eyes. "Don't just stand there gawking at it, child. Open it. The devil is always less frightening when you look him in the eye." Maya sank onto the ottoman, her fingers tracing the sharp, clean edges of the envelope. It felt like a prop from a spy movie, impossibly dramatic and out of place in her ordinary life. What could it possibly contain? An apology? Unlikely. A check for her silence. A threat elegantly worded by a team of lawyers. The silence in the small apartment was thick with anticipation. Outside, the distant, refined sound of the Bentley's engine starting and then smoothly pulling away from the curb was barely audible, but Maya heard it. He was gone, but his message sealed within this expensive paper remained. With a deep breath steeling herself for whatever lay inside, Maya slid her finger under the flap and broke the seal. The paper of the envelope was thick, almost like cardstock, its creamy texture a stark contrast to the utilitarian bills and junk mail that usually populated Maya's life. It felt alien in her small living room, an artifact from another world dropped into hers. Her hands, still slightly trembling, fumbled as she pulled out the contents. It wasn't a single letter, as she might have expected. Instead, there were several documents neatly folded together with an almost intimidating precision. The top document was a letter printed on the same expensive, heavy paper, bearing a discreet embossed letterhead, "Cromwell Holdings, Office of the Chairman." Maya's breath hitched. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the opening lines, her heart thudding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "Miss Maya Vance. Your conduct yesterday at the Daily Grind Cafe was, to put it mildly, unexpected." Maya felt a flush of indignation mixed with a renewed sense of fear. He made it sound as if she were the one who had misbehaved, as if her reasonable request were a shocking breach of protocol. So he was still arrogant, still dismissive of the core issue. She read on. Nana rose, watching her intently, her knitting forgotten in her lap. It has been a considerable time since anyone regardless of their station has seen fit to lecture me on perceived social improprieties, particularly over a matter as trivial as a discarded napkin. Trivial. The word stung. It wasn't trivial to her. It was about the dignity of her work, the respect for a shared space. His casual dismissal of her entire motivation reignited the spark of anger she'd felt in the cafe. Ordinarily, such an encounter would be dismissed as an impertinence quickly forgotten. However, your tenacity and the particular set of circumstances surrounding our interaction have prompted further consideration. Further consideration. The phrase was unnervingly vague. What did that mean? Her eyes darted down the page, hungry for clarification. I am not a man who apologizes readily. Miss Vance, primarily because I am rarely in the wrong. However, I will concede that my method of expressing my displeasure with your unsolicited critique, specifically the currency left on the floor, was perhaps unrefined. Maya blinked, reading the sentence again. Was this an apology? It was the most arrogant, backhanded, self-serving admission of fault she could possibly imagine. He wasn't sorry for his disdain, only for the unrefined method of showing it. And yet for a man like Alistair Cromwell, it was likely the closest thing to a mea culpa he had ever issued. But it wasn't the core of the letter. The reason for this communication, Miss Vance, is not to rehash yesterday's minor unpleasantness. It is to present you with an offer. An offer? Her stomach tightened into a cold knot. What kind of offer could Alistair Cromwell possibly make to her hush money? A demand that she sign a non-disclosure agreement about his boorish behavior. For some time now, my philanthropic arm, the Cromwell Foundation, has been searching for a new director for our Urban Renewal and Social Ethics Initiative. It is a program designed to identify and support grassroots projects that promote community integrity, ethical conduct in everyday life, and civic responsibility in underprivileged urban areas. The previous director, a man with a string of academic accolades and impeccable credentials, proved to be disappointingly bureaucratic and entirely out of touch with the realities on the ground. He theorized wonderfully, but achieved little of practical value. Maya's eyes widened, her mind refusing to process the words. She reread the paragraph twice, her brain struggling to connect the dots. A director. For a foundation initiative. This was impossible. Yesterday, Miss Vance, despite the inelegant context you displayed, a quality I find increasingly rare, an unshakable commitment to a principle even when faced with significant personal and professional risk. You were not cowed by perceived authority or wealth. You spoke your mind clearly and without theatrics on a matter of basic civic decency. While your assessment of my character was, of course, regrettably incomplete, your courage and conviction were noteworthy. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. She looked up at Nana Rose, her expression one of utter slack-jawed disbelief. Nana, you are not going to believe this. Believe what child read it aloud? Nana Rose urged, her eyes bright with curiosity. Her voice shaking, Maya read the rest of the letter, her mind reeling with every word. Cromwell was offering her a job. Not just any job, but a position of immense responsibility, doing work that aligned almost perfectly with her social work studies and her deepest aspirations. She put the letter down, her head spinning, and picked up the other documents. There was a glossy brochure detailing the Cromwell Foundation, filled with images of community centers, educational programs, and environmental projects. She saw its mission statement, its star-studded board of directors, and past projects. Then there was the formal offer of employment, Director, Urban Renewal and Social Ethics Initiative. The listed salary made her gasp audibly. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of earning in a decade, let alone a year. There were benefits, a housing allowance, a substantial operational budget and office. It was insane. Utterly, completely insane. He's offering me a job, Maya stammered, looking at her grandmother with wide, incredulous eyes. A really important job. He wants me to run an entire initiative for his foundation, because I told him to pick up his napkin. Nana Rose was silent for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful as she processed the stunning news. Alistair Cromwell, she murmured, testing the name. He's a complicated man in that one. Full of pride, undoubtedly. But perhaps not entirely without a peculiar kind of insight. But why Nana? Maya asked, her voice a mixture of awe and confusion. This makes no sense. Is it a trick? A test? Is he trying to humiliate me further, offering me something he knows I'm not qualified for, just to watch me fail? Perhaps, Nana Rose mused, her eyes sharp. Or perhaps he saw something genuine, something that all his money and all his yes men couldn't replicate. Integrity, Maya. You showed raw, unvarnished integrity. Maybe he's cynical enough to believe it's a commodity, so rare he's willing to pay a high price for it when he stumbles upon it. Maya looked back at the letter. He theorized wonderfully, but achieved little of practical value. Cromwell wasn't looking for another academic. He was looking for someone with grit, with first-hand experience of the realities on the ground. Someone who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power, even if that power was him. The final paragraph of the letter seemed to confirm this, and it gave her a chill. This is not charity, Miss Vance, nor is it an act of penance on my part. I am a businessman. I invest in potential. Your potential in this specific context intrigues me. Consider this offer carefully. Mr. Pendleton will contact you in precisely 48 hours to receive your answer. Should you accept, your current employer will be compensated for your departure. Compensated. The word was ominous. Was he going to buy the daily grind just to pluck her from it? Or perhaps something worse, a threat disguised as generosity? The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. Yet, the opportunity. 48 hours, Maya whispered. 2 days to decide whether to upend her entire life based on the whim of a billionaire she'd antagonized. What are you thinking, sweet pea? Nana Rose asked gently. Maya stood up and began to pace the small living room, the documents clutched in her hand. A whirlwind of emotions coursed through her. Shock, suspicion, excitement, fear. I don't know what to think. It's life-changing. If it's real, it's everything I've ever wanted to do, a chance to make a real difference. But it's from him. Can I trust it? Can I work for a man like that, knowing how he behaved? The moral dilemma was stark. Could she accept a golden opportunity that sprang from such a contentious, disrespectful encounter? Would she be selling a piece of her soul, the very integrity he supposedly admired, by aligning herself with him? Or was this a chance to use his vast resources, to do genuine good, to channel his power towards something positive, something that could help hundreds, maybe thousands of people? The image of the crumpled napkin on the floor and Cromwell's sneering face was still vivid. But so too was the allure of the position, the chance to escape the daily grind, to give Nana Rose the comfort she deserved, and to truly help people in the way she dreamed of. The encounter at the Daily Grind Cafe had been a spark. This envelope, with its astonishing offer, was an explosion. Her life, which had been a predictable, weary path just yesterday, had suddenly diverged. One path led back to the familiar struggles, the small dignities, the slow, hard-won progress. The other path, offered by an arrogant billionaire with a strange proposal, led into an unknown, dazzling, and potentially dangerous territory. Maya looked at the documents again, then out of the window at the now quiet street where the Bentley had stood. The biggest challenge of her life hadn't been telling a billionaire to pick up his trash. It was figuring out what to do now that he had, in his own unfathomable way, offered her the world for doing it. The clock was ticking. Maya's world has been irrevocably tilted. From the gritty floor of the Daily Grind to the possibility of directing a major philanthropic initiative, her courage has thrust her into an unbelievable reality. Alistair Cromwell's audacious offer hangs in the balance, a test of her principles as much as a recognition of them. Is this a genuine chance to enact the change she dreams of, or a gilded key designed by a man who bends the world to his will? Her decision will redefine her future. What would you do in Maya's shoes? Could you work for someone who initially showed such disrespect, even if it meant an opportunity to do immense good? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Maya's story of unexpected turns and moral dilemmas captivated you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling narratives. Your support helps us bring these stories to life.